Bishop Fellay is the current Superior General of the Society of St. Pius X. In addition to overseeing the work of the Society over 6 continents and directly working with the authorities in Rome, he is one of the 3 auxiliary bishops of the Society who travel around the world to administer the sacraments of holy orders and confirmation. Bishop Fellay was welcomed for confirmations this spring to St. Mary's, Kansas, one of many growing centers for traditional Catholic families in the United States. During his sermon at confirmations, His Excellency preached on the importance of the gifts of the Holy Ghost and how each gift works to strengthen the soul. From all over Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Colorado, over 130 confirmands received the indelible mark of confirmation, attesting to the growth of tradition in America's heartland. Before leaving St. Mary's for another apostolic mission, His Excellency granted an interview with Angelus Press editor James Vogel regarding several timely questions.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to meet with us. If you don't mind, we have a few questions that have been in the news recently that we hope you might shed some light on.
With pleasure.
The latest news from Rome, first of all, regarding the Society concerns provisions for our marriages. What does that mean for the Society, and how will it affect us practically?
So it's a broad question. May I recall the background of it? And the background is that since years there is a kind of jurisprudence which has been established by the official church, by Rome, which claims that our marriages would be invalid. Of course, we have enough elements in the canon law to prove that that's not the case, but nevertheless, people who want to break, if I may say so, their marriage have an easy door with this stipulation. And so since years I try to see with Rome what can be done to block this unjust, unreal situation. And so finally, after different ideas throughout the years, it's almost since 10 years that I am discussing this, and it's certainly an initiative of the Holy Father, came the idea of telling the bishops that why not recognize this situation as Catholic and hence give the delegation. That's, let's say, that's really the background. Now, as many documents, you have to read between the lines. I think the aim is the second paragraph, which says to the bishops, the priests of the Society, though the Church labels them as irregular, are capable of receiving the delegation necessary to bless, or to receive the consent of the marriage. So it is, I think, it has to be read as a new step towards the Society, in fact. Not at all a step of trying to get the Society in the pocket, so to say, but no, on the contrary, to recognize that what we do is Catholic, and telling the bishops, you can give the delegation even to these priests. And what is very interesting also, it is stated that they speak about our marriages, and they say in that case, even if diocesan priests would be delegated for, let's say, receiving the consent, nevertheless the Mass itself will be celebrated by a priest of the Society. So the fact that there is a clear statement, the priest will celebrate the Mass, priest of the Society, It is once again a new step in the right direction, saying that this priest not only can but will celebrate the Mass. And obviously in the right manner, so without any irregularity. So you have somewhere a certain contradiction in the text. It is obvious. It is to be understood in such a way that first, Rome wants to state that we, in their eyes, are not yet completely in canonical order. So they want to make that statement, but despite that, treat them normally, as if there wouldn't be now disorder. And that's the interesting. So certainly, you can have different ways to look at these texts. You can have a positive or a pessimistic way, but looking at the Holy Father, looking at how Pope Francis deals with us since a certain time, it is very clear that it is a benevolent step against us and not a trap, not a bad hidden trick or catch. No, it is a will that we are treated correctly at all levels.
So you spoke, Your Excellency, of possible contradictions in the text, or even different ways of reading between the lines. Some of the faithful who attend society masses have perhaps read a different interpretation, expecting to now accept priests from the diocese to receive their vows, and some of them seem uncomfortable with the idea of a diocesan priest, for instance, coming to a society chapel to receive their vows. What would you say to those who expect or think this provision of Rome is simply another obstacle to the faithful to get married by priests of the society?
I think when we go into the practical situation, it is difficult to see it beforehand. We will try to deal with the bishop. We will try to get the best out of the text. We already have examples right now of bishops, and especially in Argentina, which is the country of the Pope, where simply the bishop has given the delegation to our priest, period. And we expect that that will be the general situation. So the correct interpretation of the text. This does not exclude situation where, let's say, a bishop may be stubborn and so on, will insist in imposing a priest. Then we will have to look into the concrete situation. Definitely, as it is a marriage of, let's say, our faithful, they have a say. And that's why I read it this way, the text, which speaks of in an impossibility of plan A, go to plan B, which is give directly the delegation to the priest of the society. So, I mean, if there are cases where we feel uncomfortable, we have to say it. Okay. And it's even in the text, so I don't see much. Probably we'll have here and there some difficulties, but they are not without solution.
So since the document mentions the possibility of local ordinaries giving delegation directly to the society, and you've mentioned possible examples that exist already, how will the priests of the society go about trying to obtain that delegation? Is it up to individual priests, local priors, district superiors, the general house? Is there any light you can shed on how practically that will play out?
We will indicate to the different districts a path, a way of handling that case. You may have different situations. In general, as I say, we will try to not to handle this case by case, but to get a general policy with the bishops. And this would mean that there would be a contact with the superior of the district.
And speaking of general policies, in the document that was released from the General House, there was an indication that guidelines would be drawn up for the whole society. Is it premature to comment on those guidelines, or have discussions already occurred regarding those?
I think it's too early. We have also to see how this text from Rome will be received locally, and we don't yet have, or I may say, all the answers. But you can easily imagine that with such a text, most of the bishops don't bother, as it is an opening towards us, and they will just grant it.
How would we deal with the question of marriage in places where, for instance, the bishops don't want to collaborate? Is there a risk of having certain countries or dioceses where bishops grant delegation and others don't?
Strictly speaking, we could expect that. It's possible. Let's say that bishops would go against the disposition of the Pope. We know that, and I don't fear that, because we come back to the present situation, foreseen by the canon law, which says that if there is a grave, in Latin, grave incommodum, so problem, difficulty, the two future can proceed, and they must have for that situation witnesses, and if a priest is available, they take in the priest.
So in the event a local bishop would be opposed, is there some recourse to Rome to protect us, or is that not the case?
I would say it's not necessary, but we probably will look into the question, and we may speak with Rome about it. Would it be just to establish in such cases another policy, if I may say? When I spoke to the Pope about this present situation of bishops refusing, he said, "But I can give it." It was really interesting that, let's say, as an ultimate recourse, we know that, let's say, on the side of the Pope, there is a readiness.
Okay. And this may seem like a practical question in light of the recent document, but where will these marriages from here on be registered? Will they be simply in the priories and chapels of the society, or in the local diocesan parishes, or somewhere else?
If we follow, let's say, the indication of the text itself, I think that the correct interpretation would be that we continue our registration and we send the notification to the diocese.
And also, from the perspective of those who wish to be married, do you anticipate a kind of test for, let's say, the future husband and wife that we have prepared for marriage? Would it not be strange for a priest who had no role in the training of the spouses to witness their vows and even have no idea whether they're properly prepared?
Once again, I think the text foresees that we prepare, we make the tests, and the local priest is only there for the ceremony, like putting the stamp on a reality which is all ours.
And you answered this a bit earlier, but perhaps you could expound on it. You seem to interpret this as a step towards either regularization or at least of goodwill from Rome, rather than interpreting these gestures as a kind of trap to keep us from doing the work that we've already been doing. Can you comment any further on that dichotomy?
Yes, no problem. I think that this is not the first step which goes in that direction. I said that I'm discussing about 10 years already about this question. I speak about other problems which I may say would request an intervention of Rome, of the highest authority, about acts, let's say Catholic acts, which we establish and that would be recognized by Rome. And I see that this is happening at diverse levels. And the more we go, the more intense this is the common practice, which means that even though there are certain claims about us being irregular, the more and more we are treated as if things would be just normal. Say in recent years, everybody has heard about the power of hearing confessions, and worldwide, everywhere, and being not only valid but licit, that is, everybody can, without trouble of conscience, come to the priest of the society. That's an example. Another example is the ordination. Last year I received a letter from Rome telling me you can freely ordain your priest without the permission of the local ordinary. So if I can freely ordain, that means that the ordinations is recognized by the Church not just as valid, but in order. If I can freely do it, it's clear that it is just already recognized and accepted. So this is one more step in this acceptance that we are, let me call it, normal Catholics, despite this underlying that we are still not completely in order. Let's say more and more this is once again is going on, and it's not the first step, and frankly I don't see there any will to interfere, to take over, but simply the recognition that what we do as Catholics.
To switch topics a little bit, though I suppose it's indirectly related, there's a little more than a year until the next general chapter of the Society. Can you say anything about what preparations are underway and what that means for the Society, or is it perhaps too early?
No, I don't think it's too early. We can really talk about it. This chapter is the one which will happen provided everything go or are still the way they are now. So in any case, even if we were recognized before, which would imply a general chapter according to, let's say, our internal policies, so if it happens before or at that time, in any case, it is the occasion for us to look into our faithfulness to our statutes, how accurate we accomplish them, what are the failures, what are the points we need improvement, what are the new questions, new problems. And I guess that with this new possible recognition by Rome, this will, when it happens, raise quite a number of new questions, of new situations. And we certainly do already now reflect about them, but we'll have to put them in, so to say, as guidelines, as policies for the whole society. So in any case, I think it will be an important chapter. And we are preparing, definitely. 1 year is not too long before to prepare it.
And perhaps speaking even more generally, can you say how and where the Society is growing most around the world? Are there places in particular that perhaps strike you as unique or impressive?
What I see as a general, we have a more or less constant growth. Not too spectacular. Here and then a group that would just join us as a group, but that's really rare. It's more or less individuals who come, who join, or one family here or there. But this is universal. In all the countries where we are settled, in all the 5 continents, you find that some places no greater or more intense growth, and countries like the United States, some places in Africa have that, yes, but there are variations from one country to the other. So I cannot say this is for sure for 10 years. You have really one which is sometimes more increasing than another, and the whole society is still growing. And I say the more we go, the more we have the problem of not having enough priests to cope with all the needs.
Speaking of priests, what is the trend of priests coming from either dioceses or other religious congregations, perhaps showing interest in the society? Has it increased or decreased since Pope Francis? Maybe you can speak to their motives and why they choose the society out of a number of options.
Yes, it seems to me that there is not much change before and after the election of Pope Francis. I think it is it's a deeper trend than just one person being in charge. There are priests indeed who approach us. They approach us either to become member. Many of them don't necessarily want to become a member, but they want to be friends. They want to learn from us. The liturgy, the sacred liturgy on one hand, but more the doctrine. Once I was in front of a group of priest friends in Italy, it was about 2 years ago, and I asked them, well, they were about 30, and I asked them, what do you expect from us? And I was almost certain that they would say, well, teach us how to say the Mass. That was not the answer. The answer is the doctrine. That's what they expect. And it's deeper, of course. Without doctrine which explains the Mass may be, well, is beautiful and so on, but what makes it solid is the doctrine which is expressed, which is coming out of the Mass. And if you have a good and solid knowledge of this theology, it makes the liturgy even more necessary, I may say. And so that's what you see a little bit everywhere. You say priests approach us, but not just for the Mass, for much more. They want to learn tradition. Many of them, when they discover the Mass, they are frustrated. They feel cheated. They say, these are treasures, they are our treasures, and they were hidden from us. But say they don't remember that level of frustration. They really enjoy deeply the tradition, and they want to live out of it.
Your Excellency, speaking of another more universal question, Amoris Laetitia has generated a tremendous amount of confusion and controversy since it was released last year. On the one hand, one could say it's encouraging to see some wake up to the crisis in the Church. On the other hand, the pastoral results of that document are clearly devastating. There are even some who claim the society has been too soft in their critique of Amoris Laetitia. What are your thoughts about this document and the controversy it's engendered?
At the time I wrote to Pope Francis, and we prepared a text to, so to say, to wake up the cardinals, a letter from our 3 bishops. But I will not say unfortunately, that would not be the right word, but 4 cardinals took the initiative just before we were about to send the letter. That's why, let's say, there was not much noise about it, because it was already done. And so our letter is just remained in the drawer. In fact, we are certainly doing all what we can with those who raise their voice. I think it is important that people notice that we are no longer the only ones who complain, who denounce, who attack. poor situations which are, let's say, harming the souls. And it could be one of the reasons why here and there I would not talk immediately, letting their voice appear and not mixing mine with theirs, because usually when we do that, they are disqualified, because this tendency of disqualifying us in the modern church is still very present. And so rather making here their voice, let's say for the whole church, is probably better. And everybody anyway knows what we think and our positions. It has not changed, and I may say everybody knows that. So while and as long as there are voices in the church who talk in the right direction, to say that one day or another I would have spoken softly or softer does not change anything in the big picture, in the big fight, which is still there. That's very, very clear. And it does absolutely not mean that we would, by politics, in order not to, I don't know, jeopardize a possible agreement, which word is not correct, but canonical recognition, that we would lower our voice. That's simply not true. If someone would just be careful and look at all what I write and say and speak and talk, they would say that, no, I just continue, we are still the same, and I insist in Rome to say we are like this and we're not going to change. We may be a little bit less, how do you say that, controversial, attacking the persons, but our reason would not be just a personal gain. What we look for is what is the most efficient to have, so to say, a benefit for the whole church. Sometimes you gain more by giving a simple argument in simplicity rather than by barking the argument. So you have to look at the cases. It's we're still in fight, we know that, and this is definitely not over. Well, we are like that. And it's not just for the pleasure of fighting, but we belong to the militant church.
Perhaps in conclusion, a simpler question. You're here in St. Mary's, Kansas for confirmations. St. Mary's is obviously the Society's largest parish and school in America. Do you have any impressions or thoughts you might share on St. Mary's?
I admire the work of the Divine Providence in this place, which was sanctified just long before us by the Jesuit. It was the scholasticate of the Jesuit in the church, which is no longer there, it was burned. We know that over 1,000 priests have been ordained. So it's not only a very holy place, but a priestly place. And as the first scope of the society is the priesthood, it's a good reminder. And I may say, certainly we are harvesting. We are not, well, so we try to seed, but we are more harvesting from the work of previous good workers in the field of the Lord. And yes, we certainly admire and thank God for these beautiful fruits of the traditional attitude, I may say, which was everywhere before.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Your Excellency. We're much obliged.